"You picked the wrong girl," Jasmine Carter said, her voice cutting through the humid afternoon air like a shard of ice, and the park seemed to hold its breath. The chatter of children playing on the distant swings and the rhythmic tapping of sneakers on the asphalt faded into a tense silence. Officer Brad Reynolds and Officer Kyle Turner, both tall, uniformed men with mirrored aviators reflecting the blazing sun, had been sizing her up, their posture rigid with authority and the ease of men accustomed to unquestioned control. A gentle breeze shifted the leaves in the nearby oak trees, sending specks of sunlight dancing across Jasmine's dark, coiled hair, the strands catching the glint like polished onyx. Her backpack rested lightly on one shoulder, and her fingers flexed around the strap, knuckles whitening subtly, a signal of restrained energy and inner resolve. The officers stepped closer, their polished black boots clicking sharply on the concrete, echoing in the stillness, and Kyle let out a low chuckle that did not reach his eyes. "What's this? New girl thinking she owns the place?" he said, his tone dripping with amusement and a hint of condescension. Brad leaned in, the brim of his hat shadowing his face, the sunlight glinting off the metal badge pinned to his chest. Jasmine's brown eyes, steady and unflinching, met their gaze head-on, the flicker of defiance within them almost imperceptible but undeniable, a storm held in perfect calm. Around them, a few students stopped mid-stride between classes, sensing the tension, and even the birds on the lampposts seemed to pause their chirping. Jasmine drew a measured breath, the air carrying a faint scent of freshly cut grass and distant asphalt warmth, grounding her in the moment. "You're underestimating me," she added, the words deliberate, crisp, and filled with quiet authority. The officers exchanged a glance, a flash of disbelief passing between them before Brad scoffed, gesturing toward the sidewalk with a hand still gloved in black leather. "This is just a kid," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for Jasmine to hear. Kyle smirked, tilting his head as he studied her, clearly expecting her to falter, to shrink under the scrutiny, yet she remained unmoved. The park's fountain nearby splashed a rhythmic, gentle pattern, contrasting with the charged standoff, the droplets catching sunlight and scattering prisms across the hard edges of the officers' faces. Jasmine shifted her weight slightly, planting her feet firmly, subtle but deliberate, the kind of movement that radiated unspoken strength, the kind that had been cultivated quietly through hours of martial arts practice and relentless focus, honed since she could remember. Shadows from the nearby trees stretched across the ground, intersecting the officers' elongated silhouettes with her own, a visual reminder of the moral imbalance present, yet also a harbinger of the reversal soon to come. A distant dog barked once, sharp and clear, drawing a few students' attention, but Jasmine's gaze never wavered. She held the space around her with effortless command, the faint pulse of her heartbeat syncing with the muted chaos of the world around them. Brad's hand hovered near his belt, an automatic reflex of authority, while Kyle adjusted his sunglasses, the mirrored lenses reflecting a world oblivious to the fact that Jasmine's father, unknown to them, was a man whose presence alone demanded respect and silence, a Delta Force commander whose reputation stretched across classified operations and whispered legends. Yet here she stood, a teenager alone, serene, yet potent. The air between them thickened, laden with expectation, as a squirrel darted across the pathway, unnoticed by anyone but Jasmine, her senses attuned to every movement, every shift, yet her focus remained on the two men before her. Time seemed to elongate, stretching each second into an almost tangible tension, the kind that could be cut with a knife, the ambient noise of the city streets beyond the park fading to a dull hum. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, lips pressed in a line of concentration, a subtle signal that she was calculating, anticipating, waiting for the exact right moment to act within this standoff, fully aware that her presence alone challenged the assumptions these men had about control and power. The metallic clink of Brad, adjusting his utility belt, echoed in the tense stillness, and Kyle's fingers drummed lightly against the brim of his hat, the sound sharp against the soft rustle of leaves, each noise a tiny punctuation in the unspoken dialogue of dominance and defiance. Jasmine's stance was effortless yet unyielding, a careful orchestration of poise and readiness, the light catching her features in such a way that even under the harsh glare of authority, her composure radiated a quiet but undeniable power. The distant hum of traffic from the nearby road underscored the scene with a low, persistent rhythm, unnoticed by the officers too caught up in their presumption to realize that Jasmine, with her gaze unwavering, was already a force they had misjudged, the stage perfectly set for the coming revelation. Jasmine Carter stepped back slightly, adjusting the strap of her backpack as her brown eyes scanned the sunlit park with quiet calculation, each detail of her surroundings imprinting itself on her awareness. The oak trees stretched tall and strong, their leaves whispering in the gentle breeze, casting shifting shadows across the paved paths and the neatly trimmed grass. The distant sound of a basketball bouncing against the asphalt court punctuated the otherwise still afternoon, mingling with the occasional laughter of children on the playground, a rhythm of normalcy contrasting the tension immediately before her. She had always been observant, a trait nurtured over countless afternoons spent training and practicing martial arts in the small gym near her home, a place her father had insisted instilled discipline and focus from a young age. Her sneakers, clean but worn at the edges from early morning runs, flexed lightly against the sun-warmed pavement, grounding her in the present. Jasmine's mother, Denise Carter, had raised her alone for the past 16 years, balancing multiple jobs while instilling in Jasmine a sense of independence and confidence that would carry her through encounters like this one. The park was her domain, though unclaimed by anyone, a neutral space where she could measure reactions and study behaviors without interference. Jasmine's gaze swept the area, again, noting the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off the metal bicycle rack, the way the shadows of the swing set stretched across the soft ground, and the subtle movement of a squirrel darting along the fence line, each detail contributing to her mental map of the scene. Around her, the faint hum of the city beyond the park boundaries provided a steady backdrop, the distant honking of car horns and muffled conversation forming a subdued soundtrack to the tableau unfolding. She inhaled slowly, letting the crisp autumn air fill her lungs, carrying with it the scent of dry leaves and the faint tang of concrete warmed by the morning sun, a grounding sensation that calmed the pulse in her wrists and steadied the slight tremor of anticipation in her chest. Jasmine's dark hair, coiled and carefully kept, framed her face with a natural elegance, catching the sunlight in subtle highlights that shimmered as she moved her head, tilting it slightly to gauge the distance between her and the two approaching officers. Officer Brad Reynolds and Officer Kyle Turner, their polished black boots reflecting the light as they moved, approached with a confidence born from habitual authority, their mirrored aviator lenses reflecting the park around them, but failing to capture the quiet determination in Jasmine's eyes. She had learned early to read expressions, the way subtle shifts in stance or a barely perceptible narrowing of the eyes could signal intent, advantage, or hesitation. Denise had often reminded her that perception was as important as action, that the body and the mind worked in concert to convey strength or vulnerability. Jasmine's attention flicked briefly to the children on the swing set, noting the rhythm of their motion, the tension in the chains as they swung back and forth, and the way the light reflected off their hair and clothing, a reminder that life moved forward with or without the acknowledgement of those in positions of power. She flexed her fingers around the strap of her backpack, feeling the tautness of the material beneath her grip, a subtle signal of readiness, and allowed her gaze to lift to the approaching figures once more. The officers' movements were precise, deliberate, and measured, each step intended to assert control and dominance, yet Jasmine's composure remained unbroken. She adjusted the strap once more, squared her shoulders, and allowed the faintest tightening of her jaw to signal focus, a silent communication to both herself and the world that she was fully aware, fully present, and fully prepared to face the consequences of the stand she had taken. The afternoon sun dipped slightly, lengthening the shadows across the park and casting a warm golden hue that softened the edges of the hard surfaces around them, juxtaposing the rigid authority of the officers with the fluid poise of the young girl who met them without hesitation, a quiet testament to years of careful preparation, disciplined focus, and the subtle strength inherited from a father whose presence, though unseen in this moment, was woven deeply into the very fiber of her being. Jasmine's gaze moved past the officers, taking in the ripple of leaves along the fence, the distant flag fluttering gently atop the city hall across the street, and the faint movement of a cat crossing the walkway, each observation reinforcing her situational awareness and her readiness to act when the moment demanded, all the while maintaining the calm exterior that belied the potential for decisive intervention should the need arise. She stood tall, letting the light fall evenly across her features, the faint wind catching her hair and the hem of her hoodie, a subtle yet powerful movement that mirrored the steadying of her heartbeat and the alignment of mind and body in anticipation of the unfolding encounter, fully embodying the silent, measured strength of someone who had learned that composure could speak volumes. That presence alone could shift the balance of perception and power, and that every action, no matter how small, contributed to the inevitable revelation that lay ahead. Officer Brad Reynolds and Officer Kyle Turner paused momentarily, their mirrored aviators catching the shifting sunlight and reflecting the broad expanse of the park around them, each of their faces set with the confident expression of men who assumed control was always theirs by default. The smell of freshly cut grass mixed with the faint aroma of nearby food trucks, blending the ordinary with the extraordinary tension hovering between the officers and Jasmine. Brad adjusted his belt slightly, the faint metallic click of his gear breaking the ambient hum of the afternoon, while Kyle shifted his weight, the soft squeak of his polished shoes against the pavement barely audible under the birdsong from the towering oaks overhead. Jasmine, standing just a few feet away, observed their movements with an almost imperceptible narrowing of her eyes, noting the slight hesitation in Brad's posture, the way Kyle's hand flexed at his side, the subtle cues that betrayed their overconfidence despite the commanding uniforms they wore. She inhaled slowly, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs with the scent of dry leaves and warm asphalt, allowing her mind to organize the details with meticulous precision. The sunlight glinted off the metal of a nearby bike rack and danced across the ripples of the fountain in the center of the park, creating small, transient patterns of light that seemed to underscore the quiet standoff. Jasmine shifted her weight slightly, the soft rustle of her hoodie audible only to her, a grounding sound in the midst of the surrounding tension. She observed the few students and passers-by who had paused to watch, noting the subtle tightening of shoulders, the sideways glances, the curious expressions that lingered just beyond polite indifference. Every movement of hers was deliberate. Her hands rested lightly on the strap of her backpack, flexing subtly in response to the micro-movements of the officers. The distant hum of traffic, the occasional barking of a dog, the soft clink of a bicycle bell as a rider passed, all formed a low, constant background rhythm, barely perceptible but grounding her in the park and the moment, reinforcing her awareness and readiness. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the shadows stretching from the tall trees, noticing how they interlaced with the officers' own elongated forms, creating an interplay of light and darkness that mirrored the power dynamic she was silently confronting. Her breath remained measured and calm, the faint rise and fall of her chest barely noticeable as she held her position, projecting a quiet strength that contrasted with the officer's rigid display of authority. Brad stepped forward, the heel of his boot pressing lightly against a small patch of gravel, sending a few grains skittering across the pavement. And for the briefest moment, Jasmine's gaze followed the motion, noting the tension in his stance, the way his jaw clenched, the slight narrowing of his eyes as he assessed her. Kyle mirrored the motion, his own reflexive adjustments betraying the anticipation that Jasmine's presence evoked, the subtle undercurrent of uncertainty that had crept into their confident facades. She tilted her head slightly, just enough to catch the sunlight glinting off her watch, a deliberate, almost imperceptible signal of time, rhythm, and calculation. Around her, the park remained alive with small, ordinary movements, the flutter of leaves, the distant laughter of children, the slow shifting of shadows across the paths. But Jasmine existed in a space slightly apart, her awareness extending beyond the immediate, capturing the cadence of each motion, the texture of each sound, the nuanced interplay of space and presence. Her posture remained firm, shoulders squared, the faint tightening of her fingers along the backpack strap conveying a quiet readiness. Every instinct, every learned observation, every practiced discipline converged into this singular moment, a calm before the inevitable revelation, and the officers, for all their experience, could not yet perceive the depth of presence, preparation, and latent power that Jasmine carried with her, hidden in plain sight, a force tempered by patience, awareness, and the unshakable knowledge that she was never truly alone. Jasmine shifted her weight slightly, taking a measured step forward, her eyes never leaving the officers as the subtle rustle of her hoodie and the quiet squeak of her sneakers on the warm asphalt punctuated the silence between them. Officer Brad Reynolds exhaled slowly, the mirrored lenses of his aviators reflecting the dappling sunlight across the park, the fleeting patterns of leaves shimmering across his angular features. And yet he could not shake the sense of unease that had begun to creep in. Kyle Turner mirrored the motion, adjusting his stance and the fold of his sleeve, the leather of his belt faintly creaking as he moved, betraying a flicker of self-consciousness that had not been there moments before. Jasmine's gaze swept the surrounding area again, registering the subtle movements of onlookers, the curious glances of students walking between classes, the distant hum of cars on the nearby streets, each detail catalogued with methodical precision. Her hands, resting lightly on the straps of her backpack, flexed almost imperceptibly, a silent testament to her awareness and readiness. The tension contained within her controlled posture, suggesting a preparedness that contrasted sharply with the officer's outward confidence. She inhaled, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs with the faint scent of dry leaves, the warmth of the morning sun tempered by the shade of towering oaks, the combination creating a sensory framework that anchored her presence firmly in the moment. Jasmine's eyes flicked toward a nearby water fountain, the sunlight glinting across the surface in fragmented patterns, and she noted the faint ripple of movement, the soft cascade of water echoing the rhythm of her own steady heartbeat. Around her, the park remained vibrant yet subdued, the laughter of children on distant swings, the occasional call of a bird, and the muted rustling of leaves forming a backdrop that emphasized the stillness and focus of the central confrontation. Brad shifted slightly, his boot pressing against the small gravel path, a few pebbles skittering quietly, while Kyle's fingers tapped against the brim of his hat in a habitual rhythm, both men signaling authority and expectation, unaware that Jasmine's poise and observation had already begun to subtly shift the balance of attention. She tilted her head slightly, aligning the light across her face and shoulders, the shadow cast by the brim of her hoodie lending an air of deliberate composure, a visual punctuation to her unwavering attention. Every subtle movement, every micro-expression, every quiet intake of breath was noted, the interplay of posture, gaze, and environmental cues forming a silent dialogue that did not require words to communicate strength, clarity, and resolve. The park seemed to respond, the ambient noises of the city beyond fading into a low hum, as if acknowledging the concentrated presence she projected. Jasmine's eyes, dark and steady, tracked the officers as they adjusted their stances, their own gestures revealing the beginning of doubt, a crack in the armor of authority. A breeze stirred, moving through the branches above, scattering a few leaves across the path and across the sunlit ground, a subtle movement that mirrored the shifting dynamics of the moment, the ordinary world continuing its motion while the extraordinary tension at the center remained suspended. Jasmine breathed again, slow and even, her posture unwavering, her awareness extending to the textures underfoot, the shifting light across the bark of the trees, the distant glimmer of metal from a bicycle rack, each element woven seamlessly into her perception. Her mind catalogued and anticipated, each potential movement of the officers measured against her own disciplined readiness, the quiet strength she projected becoming almost palpable in the charged air. The subtle shifting of shadows, the glint of sunlight on the wet leaves, the faint sound of gravel underfoot, and the soft flutter of fabric combined to create a scene where control, perception, and latent power intersected, setting the stage for the moment when Jasmine's quiet resolve would meet the unrecognized force that had been a silent presence in her life, shaping her awareness, focus, and the unshakable confidence that now emanated from every measured gesture and deliberate breath. Jasmine Carter felt the tension thicken around her like a dense fog, the park seeming to shrink with every calculated movement of Officer Brad Reynolds and Officer Kyle Turner, their mirrored aviators catching brief flashes of sunlight that glinted off the glimmering leaves above. The faint crunch of gravel under their polished black boots echoed across the otherwise still paths, each sound amplified. In the charged silence, while Jasmine's sneakers pressed lightly against the sun-warmed asphalt, maintaining balance and readiness in equal measure. The scent of dry leaves mixed with the distant aroma of coffee from a nearby food truck, grounding her senses even as the officers closed in, their posture rigid, almost theatrical, as they assumed the stance of unquestioned authority, their hands hovering near the belts at their waists, the subtle adjustments of their gloves betraying slight anticipation. Jasmine's gaze remained steady, sweeping from the shadows stretching beneath the oak trees to the soft ripples of water cascading over the edge of the fountain, each detail catalogued with meticulous precision, the movement of every leaf, every glint of metal, every distant reflection contributing to her comprehensive awareness of the environment. She flexed her fingers around the straps of her backpack, the subtle pressure serving as a signal of her inner focus, a quiet preparation for the moment she intended to assert control without aggression, projecting calm, calculated power. A few onlookers, their curiosity piqued by the standoff, shifted uncomfortably, their whispers fading as they sensed the unspoken tension and Jasmine's unflinching poise. The sunlight, filtering through the canopy of trees, cast dynamic shadows across the officers' angular forms, stretching and twisting across the pavement, highlighting the contrast between their rigid display of authority and Jasmine's composed, fluid presence. Jasmine's mind catalogued the smallest of movements, a subtle tilt of Brad's head, the barely noticeable clench of Kyle's jaw, the flicker of hesitation in their eyes, all indicators that the balance of perception was slowly shifting. The gentle hum of the city beyond the park formed a low, constant backdrop, blending with the occasional chirp of birds and the distant laughter of children on the playground, creating a layered soundscape that emphasized the stark quiet of the confrontation at the center. Jasmine's dark eyes, steady and unwavering, projected a sense of confidence that seemed to bend the space around her, her posture straight, shoulders squared, every line of her body communicating readiness and composed authority. The leaves overhead rustled as a faint breeze passed through, scattering light across her features, highlighting the quiet intensity of her gaze and the controlled rhythm of her breathing. She adjusted her weight, subtly shifting one foot in front of the other, aligning her body to absorb and respond to any sudden change in the officer's stance, yet maintaining an unbroken calm that radiated outward, drawing the attention of all who observed, and silently challenging the assumed hierarchy of the scene. The distant echo of a bicycle bell, a dog barking, the soft hum of passing vehicles, all became reference points in her heightened awareness, each detail feeding into the broader understanding of the unfolding situation. Jasmine's presence alone began to alter the dynamics, the officer's assumed control faltering as her unwavering composure, deliberate gestures, and keen perception became increasingly apparent. Every breath she took, every flicker of movement in her gaze, every slight shift in posture spoke of readiness, discipline, and latent authority, creating a quiet but undeniable tension that suggested the moment of revelation and recognition was imminent. The sunlight shifted subtly across the landscape, lengthening shadows, softening edges, and emphasizing the interplay between authority and quiet strength, between anticipation and patience, marking the approaching turning point in a confrontation poised between perception and reality, where composure alone began to redefine the power dynamic with a clarity that was impossible to ignore. Jasmine Carter stood perfectly still for a moment, the soft autumn sunlight filtering through the canopy of oaks above and casting intricate patterns of light and shadow across the paved paths and neatly trimmed grass. A gentle breeze moved through the branches, sending a faint rustle of leaves that seemed to harmonize with the quiet intensity emanating from her poised form. Her shoulders remained squared, her stance steady, and her dark eyes focused with unwavering clarity on the two officers, whose confident posture had begun to falter in subtle ways. The distant laughter of children on the playground and the hum of traffic beyond the park provided a soft, consistent background rhythm, almost musical in its constancy, contrasting the taut stillness of the confrontation at the center. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the straps of her backpack, flexing subtly as she drew in a controlled breath, her mind cataloging every nuance. The angle of the sunlight reflecting off the metal of a nearby bike rack, the shifting shadow of a passing cloud, the glint of her watch catching a flicker of light, the distant movement of pedestrians navigating the sidewalks. Each detail contributed to a sense of situational awareness that extended beyond the immediate standoff, reinforcing the calm authority she projected without a word. The officers' mirrored aviators reflected not just the environment, but the subtle tension that had begun to unnerve them, their body language betraying micro-hesitations in the rhythm of their steps, a slight tightening of the jaw, the faint flinch of a shoulder, as if sensing the potential in the quiet presence before them. Jasmine's gaze briefly shifted to the ripples in the fountain water, the way light danced on the surface, fragments of reflection creating a pattern almost hypnotic, grounding her perception in both the tangible and the ephemeral. Her dark hair, catching the sunlight, shimmered faintly with warm highlights, the gentle movement in the breeze adding a dynamic, almost cinematic quality to her figure, which remained steady and composed amidst the slow, unfolding tension. She adjusted her weight just slightly, knees subtly flexed, allowing for a seamless shift should she need to move. Yet her composure conveyed absolute control of her space and presence. The distant sound of a dog barking, a bird calling, and a bicycle bell clinking blended with the ambient city noise, each faint echo absorbed into her heightened awareness, creating a sensory map of the environment. Jasmine's chest rose and fell with measured calm, her breathing nearly imperceptible, projecting an aura of poise and patience that contrasted sharply with the officer's forced confidence. The sunlight shifted subtly as the afternoon progressed, lengthening shadows and highlighting the contours of her face, the fine texture of her hoodie, and the taut, controlled stance of her posture. Each movement of the officers, slight shifts of feet, the barely perceptible clenching of fists, the adjustment of gloves, was recorded in her mind, a sequence of cues that revealed more about their internal state than any words could convey. The interplay of light, shadow, sound, and subtle motion around Jasmine created a tableau of quiet suspense. The ordinary elements of the park, the rustle of leaves, the shimmer of sun on water, the distant rhythm of urban life, interwoven with the extraordinary focus and control radiating from her. In this suspended moment, time itself seemed to stretch, the world beyond the park dimming into background hum as Jasmine's presence dominated the space, her awareness and discipline painting each detail with clarity, and every micro-gesture, every breath, every glance became part of the silent dialogue of strength, anticipation, and moral composure, preparing the scene for the inevitable revelation that would follow. Jasmine Carter's calm gaze did not waver as a soft vibration from her backpack drew her attention, signaling an incoming call, the screen illuminating her face with a cool blue light. She accepted it, and the voice on the other end, low and measured, resonated with a presence she had always known, a voice that carried authority yet exuded calm, one that could fill a room even through the faint static of a phone connection. "Jasmine," the voice began, deliberate and steady. "I see the situation. Maintain your position, observe, and let the dynamics unfold." Her posture remained unwavering, her eyes meeting the mirrored reflection of sunlight on Officer Brad Reynolds' aviators, noting the subtle tightening around his eyes, the micro-expressions that betrayed awareness without acknowledgement. The voice continued, providing silent reassurance through command, a quiet but undeniable influence that filled her with composed confidence, a lineage of preparedness and authority she carried silently, inherited, and honed through disciplined training. Brad and Kyle shifted their weight, the subtle adjustments of their gloved hands and the slight inhale of breath betraying a flicker of uncertainty, a deviation from the strict rhythm of dominance they had intended to project. Jasmine's dark hair moved gently in the soft autumn breeze, each strand catching the light, the visual interplay of movement and stillness a mirror to the tension vibrating through the space. She flexed her fingers again against the straps of her backpack, the subtle motion barely noticeable, yet purposeful, each micro-gesture reinforcing her grounded presence, the measured cadence of her breathing aligning with the steady heartbeat she projected outward, an unspoken signal of resolve. Around them, the ambient noises of the city, distant traffic, faint laughter, birdsong, continued, yet they seemed muted, absorbed into the central tableau where observation, patience, and latent power held sway. Jasmine's eyes shifted to the pattern of sunlight filtering through the leaves, dappled and constantly shifting, each flicker a reference point, a subtle cue integrated into her situational awareness. Her stance remained fluid yet controlled, knees flexed lightly, shoulders squared, projecting a strength that needed no words, the natural ease of someone prepared for contingencies yet unshaken by the presence of those who assumed immediate control. A soft wind stirred, moving the hem of her hoodie and the edges of her sleeves, the subtle movement reinforcing the contrast between her calm authority and the officer's slowly unraveling composure. The distant hum of a lawnmower, the faint clink of a metal gate in the park, and the gentle slap of a basketball against a concrete court were all incorporated into her awareness, each sound a thread in the tapestry of the moment, reinforcing her mastery over perception, space, and anticipation. As the phone call ended, Jasmine lowered her hand, the quiet reassurance of her father's presence still echoing, lending invisible weight and power to her stance. While Brad and Kyle exchanged another brief glance, the unspoken realization of the stakes beginning to dawn. Shadows stretched longer across the pavement as the afternoon. Lights softened, the interplay of illumination and shade emphasizing the contours of the park, the positions of the participants, and the subtle shifts in energy between them. Jasmine's eyes flicked briefly to the distant fountain, noting the way water caught the sunlight in miniature prisms, a visual rhythm that mirrored the unfolding tension. Every movement, every sound, every detail of her surroundings became a piece of the larger narrative. The quiet preparation and poised observation she exhibited shifting the balance imperceptibly but decisively. The officer's previously rigid and confident stance wavered minutely, a reflection of the growing awareness that Jasmine's presence was not simply passive but subtly commanding, each measured breath, each slight gesture, and the quiet strength of her posture asserting an authority that transcended their superficial control, signaling the imminent turning point in a scene where perception, discipline, and moral composure converged. Jasmine Carter felt the shift in the energy around her as Officer Brad Reynolds and Officer Kyle Turner subtly stepped back, their rigid stances softening as the realization of the unseen weight behind her presence settled over them. The afternoon sun, now lower in the sky, cast long golden rays across the park, illuminating the glint of her watch and the edges of her backpack, emphasizing the composed determination she radiated. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves above, scattering dappled light across the asphalt and the surrounding grass, as though nature itself acknowledged the quiet assertion of authority that Jasmine now embodied. Her posture remained upright, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted, the precise alignment of her body communicating calm control without a single word. The distant sound of a bicycle bell, faint laughter of children on swings, and the low hum of traffic beyond the park all blended into a soft ambient soundtrack, grounding the scene in reality even as the tension shifted palpably. Jasmine's eyes, steady and unblinking, tracked every small movement of the officers, the flex of fingers, the minuscule adjustment of weight, the brief hesitation in gaze, and cataloged them in a mental rhythm of observation that had been honed through years of disciplined practice. The sunlight glinted across the metal of a nearby fountain, each ripple reflecting fleeting patterns onto the surrounding pavement, and Jasmine allowed herself a subtle awareness of these natural movements, integrating them into the sense of space and timing she projected outward. A faint shuffle of feet, the rustle of fallen leaves, the soft sway of branches in the breeze, all contributed to the layered texture of the moment, yet Jasmine remained the focal point, her composed stillness anchoring the flow of attention and the rhythm of expectation. Her breathing remained steady and measured, in sync with the slow rise and fall of her chest, each exhale a deliberate release of tension, each inhale a gathering of silent authority. The officers exchanged a brief glance, their own expressions subtly softened, the air between them no longer rigid but charged with recognition of the shift in dynamic. Jasmine's dark hair caught the golden light, each coil and curl highlighted against the shadowed background of the park, her figure both natural and commanding in presence. She shifted her weight ever so slightly, a micro-adjustment that signaled readiness and focus, and the faint rustle of her hoodie and backpack strap punctuated the silence with evidence of her composed poise. Around her, the ordinary sounds of the park, the distant bark of a dog, the flutter of birds' wings, the faint clatter of a baseball against the pavement, formed a subtle rhythm, emphasizing the contrast between the calm strength of Jasmine and the previously unquestioned authority of the officers. Each micro-gesture, each careful placement of her feet, the alignment of her shoulders, the steady focus of her gaze, all contributed to a silent assertion of moral and perceptual authority, shifting the attention, bending the expectation, and commanding respect without a single overt action. The long shadows stretching across the paths and grass created a visual cadence that mirrored the internal rhythm of awareness and control Jasmine maintained, each element in the environment, contributing to the growing recognition of her quiet power. The officers' movements became tentative, their confidence tempered by the clarity and steadfastness she projected, and the surrounding ambient noises seemed to fade into a muted backdrop, emphasizing the concentration, the discipline, and the integrity that defined her presence in this moment, preparing the stage for the final acknowledgement of influence, the silent assertion of strength, and the unspoken shift in power that her unwavering composure had orchestrated. Jasmine Carter stepped forward, the late afternoon sun casting a warm golden hue across the park, illuminating the subtle highlights in her dark hair and the edges of her hoodie, her posture relaxed yet exuding a quiet command that seemed to ripple through the surrounding space. The air was filled with the soft rustle of leaves overhead and the faint, distant laughter of children finishing their games, blending with the muted hum of city traffic beyond the park boundaries, creating a serene yet charged backdrop for the resolution unfolding. Officer Brad Reynolds and Officer Kyle Turner remained a few feet behind, their previously rigid stances softened into hesitant acknowledgement, the tension in their movements replaced by a palpable recognition of Jasmine's composure and the unseen authority she carried. Each subtle shift of weight, each micro-gesture of attention, reflected the recalibration of perceived power, the invisible presence of discipline and lineage now fully realized without a word spoken. Jasmine's gaze swept once more across the environment, taking in the fluttering of birds, the shimmering reflections of the fountain, the texture of the sun-warmed asphalt beneath her sneakers, each detail a grounding element that reinforced her calm and unshakable poise. Interplay of light and dark echoing the resolution of the confrontation. The officers exchanged a glance, subtle but telling, their expressions softened by a dawning comprehension that authority was not merely assumed by uniform or rank, and that Jasmine's quiet, disciplined presence had reshaped the narrative without confrontation, their own perception of control subtly recalibrated. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the distant fountain again, noting the ripple of water and the way sunlight fractured across its surface, integrating these observations seamlessly into her awareness and reinforcing her connection to the moment. Golden light reflecting her calm strength and the invisible but undeniable influence she had exerted, a moment suspended in time where perception, respect, and unspoken understanding redefined the scene entirely.